Hi everybody, what's up? You're listening to I Was Just Wondering with me, Tom Salmon, the show that dives into music, film and games, and everything else in between. My guest on this week's show is Josephine Mackerras, who wrote, directed and produced her debut feature film Alice. We jumped into Josephine's filmmaking career, the double standard women face within society, and what her dream film project would be, right before she headed off to South by Southwest and Alice stormed the film festival. So, if you're running, stuck in a traffic jam, or sitting behind a desk at work, I hope you enjoy my interview with Josephine. Just before we jump in with the film, I'd love to know a little bit more about your sort of backstory, because I read from the press notes that you grew up in Australia and China, and also how did you kind of get into the arts in your formative years?
I joined a theatre company at the age of 9. And that's just been my love and my passion for, forever. And, I played the saxophone and painted. So I guess filmmaking really synthesized all of that, great writing and acting and music. And that's sort of the synthesis of everything I've always loved my whole life. I grew up in Australia and my father, works half every year in China. When I was a kid, I went and lived there for a year. But that's always been a big part of my life, China, because my parents.
Because I imagine that's quite like the culture clash. How did those two sort of countries sort of influence your filmmaking?
That's a hard question for me to answer because it's sort of I guess I've always been very open to other cultures. I guess that's an influence it had on me. I've traveled. I left Australia when I was 16 and traveled, lived in Europe and in Jerusalem, and I guess it just opened me up. The world is a small place.
I was going to say that perhaps it's not necessarily differences between the two places, but just the idea that your POV on life or the world is sort of far greater from having that sort of experience of sort of traveling. Because I think often people can just get locked into a particular sort of point of view about life because they just haven't seen what's out there, the rest of the world.
Absolutely. Because even my mother, she worked with refugees my whole life. So.
Oh, really?
And also Aboriginal community. So, yeah, it's true. The more I think about it, I really, we had refugees from Philippines and Vietnam, and definitely grew up, knowing Australia's not the be all and end all.
And it's one of the furthest, I guess, coming from the UK, it's one of the furthest places away. So I just wanted to sort of touch upon, because you, like myself, have studied, I studied in New York myself, I studied theatre, and you studied filmmaking at NYU. So I was just sort of curious about, in terms of going through the idea of sort of film education, that what was the best piece of advice that your lecturers gave to you in class that you still use today?
It's funny, good sound comes first and foremost, I guess, because it's, good sound. Jeez, the best advice. Oh my goodness. Script is everything. Script is king and queen. And I think that's absolutely true.
I was just wondering, because you're at NYU, did you have any famous guest lecturers that turned up?
No, I heard a lot. But no, I didn't personally have anyone.
Because I remember I had friends that went to one semester where Martin Scorsese would occasionally drop in.
Yeah, I know. I heard all about those too. And I got to see his first short. Yes, that's not everybody gets to see that, but see that he really had something to say. I guess that's something that is really, I think it's important for a director, that is, they're really passionate about, they've got something to say, and I still remember that short film, even though I didn't like it. It was just something, because there's a sort of violent element that I have a problem with violence, but it was a really strong commentary about, what the subject, which is about, I think it was some war going on. I can't remember. It was something about the military. I can't actually remember, but I just remember. It's interesting. I still remember that film. So there you go. That's not every day you can say that about a short. I've seen hundreds of short films, and that one stays in my mind. So not because it's Martin Scorsese, but just because it really had a powerful message, and I got that message.
Yeah, I guess tackling the most sort of evocative subject matter in a sort of careful or considered way or not, as long as it sort of stays with the audience. I guess that's just kind of, for better or worse, that's kind of what you're aiming for. So I just wanted to just quickly touch upon that you've written and directed 4 short films leading up to your first feature, what you learned or how that prepared you for tackling your first feature.
Oh gosh, I mean, they were my schooling, absolutely. I mean, but then making a feature actually is the biggest schooling because the more you know, the more you know you don't know. I realized early on that's my greatest love is working with actors, and I mean, I've just learned so much. I don't even know where to begin. But I realized also that shorts and features are very different mediums.
Right.
Successful short is a special talent in itself, and I think making a good feature is another talent.
Yeah, I think in some ways that the short film's like the short story, and then obviously the feature is like the novel. And I guess like people can be really great at sort of really catchy short film that people are like, wow, for like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But then holding somebody's attention for like 2 hours is a completely different art form.
And I guess that's, comes back to the writing. Absolutely. I do think it's, making a feature, it's really a whole different writing ball game.
Do you have like an elevator pitch for Alice?
So it's about a woman who's sort of, is really kind of a perfect wife and a perfect mother. And she's, after discovering her husband's addiction to high-end escorts, she's left penniless and on the edge of eviction. And she becomes drawn into the same sort of secretive world that's ruined them as a means of caring for herself and her child. That's the elevator pitch.
So far, have you been out to any sort of like festivals or events with it, and what kind of reactions have you been getting from audiences so far?
South by Southwest is the world premiere.
Okay.
So no, I haven't. I mean, I've had, just screen testing, but, not like we hired a cinema or anything, but just people who work in the industry, and getting feedback. But yeah, in terms of a real public, no. Yeah, the film was just finished about 3 days ago.
So that's the final sort of like locked edit you finished just 3 days ago?
Yeah, when did you see the film?
I saw it on Monday.
So I think, you saw the finished version. Did you?
Oh, wow.
Or did it say still to be finished?
No, there was no time code. There was no, there was no notes.
Version. Yeah.
Okay, so just jumping back to the genesis of this project, I just wondered what have been the 3 most pivotal moments from the journey of getting Alice from just an idea bouncing around in your head. Also, did you write it in English first and then translate, or can you write in French?
Yes, I wrote in English and I worked with the translator. We worked very closely together to get the French version. It's actually going to be set in London. I mean,
was it?
London, yeah. It could have been, for me, it could have been set in London, New York, or Paris. I wasn't really attached. It was just because I had a baby and then I wanted to shoot locally.
Right.
But in terms of 3 pivotal moments, my God, there's been so many.
So when did you first kind of get an idea that you wanted to tell this sort of story?
I actually did a screen writing class a weekend. A writer called Mark Tilton. He had this exercise that was about joining opposite traits, character traits. Sort of like, housewife, hooker, and, Anyway, and then I kind of came up with this pitch, and it sort of everyone in the class was like, oh, that sounds really good. Yeah, and then I sort of went away and really thought about it. A lot of things that really interested me to work on, and how it sort of joined. There was there's a political kind of element to the film, and then there's also much more intimate commentary about relationships and coming of age, even though she's 30. But and I guess there's just so many things that came in and joined together in that little synopsis I came up with years ago in a writing class.
How long ago was it before you came up with the idea?
So this was like years ago, maybe 7 years ago.
Oh, okay.
So the idea stayed in the back of my mind, and then lots of things happened since then that sort of joined it together, and then I started writing a script, which is often that's often the way. You'll have something, in your mind for years, and then before you actually sit down in front of the computer and actually write, which was definitely the case with Alice.
I mean, that's 7 years is really quick for a feature film, because it can take 20 years to sort of get there. So that's really impressive, from like the inception of the idea and then to shooting and editing. And I wondered, like, how long did the first draft take you to write, and how many drafts did you write before you showed anybody the script?
My idea was I wanted about a couple that stayed together.
Right.
So I sort of banged my head on trying to make that work for, I don't know, gosh, so long. And it didn't. It just, maybe in a TV series, you have something in a relationship where, one of the partners does something so, turns out they've got a real problem, and destroys the family financially, and, abandons her and then comes back, and that maybe that, the idea that they stay together would be an interesting television series, because I think it happens all the time, And it's a much more complex interest. I mean, I think that's an interesting idea. But anyway, it didn't work. In terms of a film, it didn't work. Yeah, so that took a long time to get to that point where I realised, no, they have to break up. And then it turned into something else again.
When did you first start showing the sort of script?
I worked on it alone for a long time. Probably was around 2016 or something. It got official selection at the Atlanta Film Festival for unproduced screenplay.
Right.
So that was nice. It was kind of a really nice encouragement. And then that's when I think I started showing it to producers, because I always wanted to do, after the whole kerfuffle with my other feature, I really wanted to do it on my own. But then it started getting a lot of really, really positive responses, and it's like, no, this is good enough. You've got to find a producer.
Right.
And so I wasted time trying to do that. I had producers who were really interested, but then we would always headbutt on particularly around the prostitution thing. Producers didn't know how they would defend that, because it is sort of it's a grey area. I think we don't have a problem with the victim side of it. I mean, we all understand that the sort of victimization that happens within the industry, that a woman could do it and not feel degraded, and that's something that's I don't know why that's taboo. There's something very taboo about that. It's interesting.
And I'm probably getting in trouble for saying this. I don't have a problem with transactional sexual relationships as long as, the parties are professional and the terms which are agreed upon are met. That you don't necessarily have to be a victim or exploited.
What mostly fascinates me about that is what it sort of says about our, unconscious sort of attitudes anyway. There's something like, it's almost like we've got a problem with how powerful women and women's sexuality can be. I think there is a sort of privilege as well that comes with being a young, beautiful woman in the world. I mean, there is, I feel as a woman who's getting older, I don't, it's interesting in my 20s, you just get the very nice treatment from men wherever you go. As you get older, you get less and less visible. More, you start feeling more and more visible.
Yeah.
And I don't know why it's sort of so controversial to talk about that. That there is a sort of power that is that I think if men could make the kind of money that is possible for women in the industry, maybe we'd have a different discussion around this. I mean, I remember seeing what was this show called? Gigolos.
Right, the male version.
I mean, that's almost affectionate, isn't it? A gigolo. It was just so interesting because, there was a TV series made about gigolos, and it really went into, how much they help women. They help women through divorces or, finding sexual confidence but their own career ambitions. And it's like, that's so interesting. Can you even imagine a series like that about women in the industry? Why? Well, have sort of this affectionate term for these hookers and how they help men and, what beautiful people they are and, they've got these career ambitions. Maybe I'm stating the obvious, but there is a double standard.
There is, yeah. I also think that in terms of like, if you are sort of like a sex worker, there are certain people suited to like certain jobs. Working a 9 to 5 for some people would be, they just can't do it. They wouldn't be able to exist in society and maybe they'd be sort of like homeless. But things like, I guess, like being like a sex worker sort of fits their sort of like personality type. Sure, like if that's how you have to navigate your way through life or a certain portion through your life, I don't understand what necessarily the issue with that is.
There are two ways of looking at it, because we live in a sort of this, capitalist world where there is a kind of lack of humanity. It's all about, market value and blah, blah, blah. And I don't think women are responsible or, just as a culture where, individuals can be held responsible for that. And yet, why is it that women get judged when they take advantage of a system they didn't necessarily create? But do you know what I mean? It's sort of.
I do.
It's I'm not pro or against prostitution. I mean, I'm certainly not. I don't think it's any girl dreams of when she grows up being a hooker. But the reality. This is sort of interesting in the research because it was very easy to talk to women who work sort of in the lower end. It's almost like the sort of identification with being a hooker is sort of less of a problem for them. I don't know why, but the higher you go, often the less they want to be associated with it because they've got career ambitions, or they're in university, or or I even spoke to one, who was teaching at a university, and she'd done that worked for a few years.
Right.
So they don't want to be associated, and I think that's sort of interesting because it is sort of like a stepping stone. They want to pay off a mortgage, or they've got goals, financial goals, but they definitely know the repercussions, secretive and scared, about. And I think there's also a kind of a deep kind of shame that, that's put on them. I mean, I think it's it's over 2,000 years old, this sort of shame,
Yeah.
The whore. And, I mean, my initial interest in that part of the story came, there was a big, I should get really clear about the dates and everything, but L.H. Splitzer in New York, he was Russian.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I read the blog. Remember, he was, caught using public money, mind you, which is a real offence.
Yeah.
For high-end escorts. And then two of the girls got outed. One of them was an English teacher. Do you remember this?
And yeah.
And it was very interesting because 2 years later he was re-elected, or everything was fine. But 5 years later, she still couldn't get a job. So, once again, it was like, whoa, that's very interesting. There's a real double standard because, why, so what's, and I think she wrote, once a whore, always a whore, you can't, there's a very big stigma. So anyway, once again, I'm not, interested in, I mean, it's not my kind of war to defend hookers and, that's like, the right to be a hooker. I don't, but I am interested in what it sort of does say about society as a whole. It's just what it, just in our average daily lives, those of us who aren't in that industry. I mean, it still must reflect something about how we feel about, the difference between what men can get away with and what women can get away with.
I mean, that's true. I mean, one of the things about this sort of Alice's story that hit me the hardest was definitely the double standard of Francois sleeping with the escorts just made him a bad husband, but Alice working as an escort made her an unfit parent.
It's quite a deep question because I think it goes back to archetypes. It goes back to, the Virgin Mary and the whore Mary. It's sort of the split that we kind of know in Catholicism and, like you've got your mother and wife at home, and she's one you take care of and protect, and she's holier than thou. And then you've got your mistress, the whore, that you have great sex with. You can't join the two. And that split that women have had in their sexuality for centuries, And I think, it's very interesting, and it's sort of, I think it sort of does come back to the power in female sexuality.
In terms of Francois' sort of like character, I thought it was interesting that how he views Alice in terms of like, this person is a pure influence and wants to keep that separate. And then obviously the sort of stuff he's doing outside of the sort of marital home. That men's relationships with their mother is a difficult one because it's the idea of the nurturer versus like lust, and just reconciling those two things, and also being able to bridge the gap and saying, well, this person can be a nurturer and also it can be an object of lust. I don't know why those things are sort of like too mutually exclusive, and maybe that's more of a sort of psychological sort of like topic. There definitely is that clash about keeping those things very, very sort of separate.
Yeah, I know. It is. It's a split. It's the bipolarity of sort of society when it comes to women. And I think it's interesting because I do think it comes back to the mother. I mean, I feel like our relationship with our mother, it's sort of, I mean, we don't even know we're separate from our mother until the age of 2, I think. Isn't that what that's? She's kind of like God, I mean, she's everything when we come out of the womb. And they're our deepest, most visceral, physical, emotional memories. This thing about need, how much we need her. It's interesting how that clashes with in male psychology. Sort of cultures that have still, won't give women the right to drive. We have to cover her from head to toe. It's sort of this thing of needing to control something that has so much power over us. I'm not sure there's a more powerful influence in our, in terms of in intimate relationships than our mother. Because the more intimate a relationship, the more it gets down to our deepest sort of needs and desires, and if we were freaking breastfed or not. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
we know now how much things like that, this sort of crying it out, leaving a baby to scream for hours, actually, affect the brain and affect psychology. It's sort of, I mean, I guess it's complex, and I feel like that there's something about in relationships when that I feel like Francois does, he comes back to Alice, and she has to take him back, like a mother. Because a mother can forgive anything, the source of unconditional love. So he comes back to her with that same expectation, going to come back and say, on my knees and say, I need help, and you've got to save me. And it's almost like a mother-child, and that's what about Francois, because I think he sort of stunted his growth somewhere in young childhood, but he has the power of a man with the needs of a child, I think that's not uncommon. I mean, he's an extreme example. Don't think it's uncommon. I mean, in men and women, but I mean, I think it's interesting for men towards women because we have got this, I think the female perfection or this ideal is what often motivates men in love. They look for this ideal. It's very difficult when you realize a woman is not, but I mean, there's sort of something about that female ideal that I think men can be trapped by.
Yes.
It's all mixed in. I'm talking about there's a lot of trying to spin 10 plates at once. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense.
No, that's fine. I mean, we're definitely getting like a deeper sort of sense of when you watch the movie, these sort of themes are definitely all bubbling up there. One of the things I was sort of interested by, I mean, was like the brittleness of the male ego. Right at the very beginning of the movie when they're having this sort of dinner party scene, and then Francois gives this lovely speech to Alice and passionately kisses her in front of their friends for too long, and it gets a little bit uncomfortable. Then within that sort of same scene, you have him writing his sort of like novel, and it's taking him sort of 10 years to do so, and then Alice makes that comment about, Rome wasn't built in a day, and there's just this lingering shot of him dealing with, he's this very sort of like charismatic man, a clever man, but yet at some point perhaps he feels he's sort of like failed in terms of his ambitions in sort of like life.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked that up. Because it's really important. I mean, Francois' character, there's a big backstory to him. I think if Francois was less fucked up, he would be a writer. He would be an artist. He would have all of this sort of damaged stuff in him would be channeled. And the fact that he hasn't had kind of guts or whatever to see it through, has created a really destructive thing in his personality. And it sort of is another theme in the film in a way, because I do think, Francois, he does have a brilliance that got screwed up because he's too, he's screwed up. So he doesn't, he's gone and done everything the right way and got married and had a kid and got this job that he hates, and he's doing everything right, and it's killing him, because I think Francois is sincere. I think he sincerely loves Alice, and I think he could have been an option for Alice to stay with Francois and sort of be his nurse. Do you know what I mean? That is story in that, and I think that happens. I think there's personalities like Francois really do exist, and I think there's something devastating about when somebody really does have a lot to say and has been very screwed up from childhood and is very talented but can't get it out. It sort of creates a split personality, because I think Francois does live via his fantasies rather than channel that into work. He's taken an easier path of kind of creating a kind of a fantasy life.
So from your perspective, in the context of the story, I just wondered, would it have been worse if Francois had cheated on us with, like I say, like a co-worker or using the escort service? And the reason why I ask is because I'm kind of interested in the idea of like emotional intimacy versus just purely physical intimacy.
I do think it would be a lot worse. Yes. I mean, for the marriage, absolutely. Because you're right. It's because this sort of exchange that you can, with a hooker, where you can just project whatever fantasy, or it's all about creating your own fantasy rather than joining with another human being and discovering each other. That's much more threatening to a relationship or marriage.
Yeah, I do as well, because I think the idea within an affair is that it always starts with an emotional intimacy and bond that's formed over a period of time, versus I'm here for an hour with this person, it's anonymous, and then it's kind of like done.
Exactly, absolutely. And I've had it's interesting, because I remember talking to a girl saying she had a client that was kind of a famous rock star. She said she really respected that he would come and pay. And he said to her, he pays to leave. And it's interesting because, you know, if you take a fan, like, because this person he'd probably have a choice of 20 girls that want to go there.
Yeah.
But he doesn't do that. It's respectful because, you know, you leave and there's no game. It's all up front. And she's very happy that you leave, and it's actually very respectful.
So just jumping back into the filming of Alice, so you're shooting in Paris, and I was thinking, did you ever think about making the sex scenes more explicit?
No, it's because I wanted it from her point of view, and she's detached, you know, and I really wanted it to be that sort of cold transaction that she is experiencing.
I don't like to generalise in terms of male and female filmmakers in terms of what they're going to shoot and what they're not going to shoot and how they're going to shoot it. But it is interesting how, say, if you'd written a script and you'd given it to a male director, of the kind of things that they would have pulled out from it visually. And I don't necessarily think it's all that true. They say that men are more visual in some regards.
Do you mean sexually or?
Well, I think sexually, in terms of men are going to notice just certain things about women, physical things first, perhaps.
I think that's true. In terms of the story, I'd be interested to know how a male director might, you know, it still comes back to that thing if you're telling where you want the audience to be focusing, and if it's getting into raunchy sex, which is not what really the film is about.
Yeah, because that could completely sidetrack your story, because that's not something you're necessarily dealing with, explicit sex, and then you have that in there. It kind of pulls focus from elements within the movie.
Yeah, exactly.
What was your toughest scene to shoot as a director?
When Francois comes back, because I knew that I wanted something completely explosive. We kind of improvised around it. I had marks, the moments that I wanted to find. We did a rehearsal and we improvised around it, and they did a really amazing improv. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to write the structure and we're just going to go around that. And they were like, no, it's fine. Well, it wasn't fine. And I did plan séquence. How do you say that in English? Where you shoot the whole thing in one go.
Oh, like a wanna.
God.
Yeah, they're very virtuosic.
It was terrible because we didn't have the blocking down. I mean, it was just a nightmare. And it was a nightmare in the edit. It was painful to find that scene because, what do you call it? You know, the blocking was different.
Right.
But that, you know, you live and learn.
So you've got the breakdown at the very beginning with Alice. She's on the phone, she's in a room, there isn't much going on. Like how you edit it, you build a sort of like pace, like it doesn't get stagnant, it doesn't get boring. And I wondered if you had a very clear vision going in with that actually in the edit.
Script is a bit like that, and I guess it comes from my fear of boring an audience. I mean, which you can do so easily, it's terrible. But that thing of just you have to keep this going. Like it's got to keep going. I guess that, you know, the edit, like the first rough cut was 3 hours and, you know, it's just a really long process of just, you know, when is this moment up? And I can still see in the film, I think, oh my God, that really is not good enough, but oh God, it's too late, you know.
So on the page, was it broken up?
Yep.
And then you sort of like just picking out those moments of knowing what you wanted.
But I have to say it got all reduced, you know, like I mean, I guess editing is really about getting rid of what you don't need and just left with the essentials. And I mean, I still think I could have done another good 2 weeks on the edit, which I didn't have that time. I mean, who was that famous writer who said, I'm sorry, this letter is so long, I didn't have time to write you a shorter one? I
can't remember who said that, but that's...
there's nothing truer than that.
Yeah, it's true. So I did want to ask, when you were locked away in the editing bay, was there any particular films you kept coming back to?
Really honest, no, because I was editing 10 hours a day and then I also live alone with a 5-year-old.
Oh, okay.
I just didn't have time to do anything. I certainly have filmmakers and films that I love. That question maybe more so when I was talking to my DP.
Right.
Before the shoot, I'd come to films and Susan Bier, you know, I love her earlier films. I just love them. And Lynn Ramsey. So, I mean, But yeah, in the editing, no.
Because at the moment, there's a big thing about within the entertainment industry of seeing people on screen or behind the camera saying that you can aspire to, like, say, a filmmaker like Lynn Ramsey. And I just wondered, coming up through wanting to be a filmmaker, director, and artist, in terms of seeing other women do it, did you feel that there was a huge, I mean, obviously there is, but a huge vacuum, and were you aware of that?
I mean, I guess when I look at a film, I just don't think about that. But interesting that they're both women and there's so few women, and they're the films that speak to me, you know, deeply. But even Milos Forman, his early films, I mean, he's just one of the world greats. But it's true, there's something about the way they capture humanity. The fact they're women is actually just a coincidence. It really is. I haven't really thought the whole thing about being a woman, I guess when I was younger, I mean, I remember because I've always been in the theatre and I've loved acting, and I just remember wanting to make films from, you know, literally sort of 17, 18 years old. really, the idea of making just, my God, that would be the best job in the world. And I remember a filmmaker I respected saying to me, "Oh, actresses can't make films." And I just bought it. So, oh yeah, I can't do that.
Wow.
I can't even imagine a young woman buying that bullshit today.
Most people would say, fuck you, I'm doing it anyway. The thing that you start out doing may not be the thing you end up doing, but having that passion and that tenacity to move forward, that's something that should be more talked about and more pushed.
I agree that it's true, especially in acting. You often find people in younger, they'll spend years as an actor and they'll find where they really fit the movie industry from that. Because we, fall in love with the movies, and what do we see are the actors. I know costume designers and production assistants and editors and sales agents that have all started as actors. And then they find their way through that to where they're
fit into where they're sort of like best suited.
Yeah, exactly. They're making movies, but, from a different angle.
Yeah, and I also think that's a really good point, the idea that the actors kind of, in a way, have the easiest part. Like, they learn their lines, they turn up, they haven't spent the 7 years, the sort of like project.
Yeah, an actor do 5 films in a year. Actor, you're lucky to do 1 film every 5 years.
That's very true. So you're going to have your world premiere at South by Southwest, which is a huge film festival. But are you going out there to find distributors? Or are you going out there to sell it to, say, like a Netflix or an Amazon? Or
I've taken on a sales agent.
Okay.
I mean, I'm hoping it gets distribution. I'd love to do a remake in English. I feel a little bit like, there's something about this that is really good for an Anglo audience. And I would love to just not have to produce again. I cannot wait to be working on a project where I'm just the writer-director. I
noticed on the credits you crowdfunded part of the movie as well. Did you get any soft money or any grants to help you, or was it all self-financed?
It was all sort of self-financed.
Wow.
Well, I know, it's crazy. I'd never do it again.
If you want to get something done, sometimes you have to, don't you?
I guess I realized that I kind of just wanted to have total control of the script and the edit. And that's also part of me discovering myself as a director. I've never made a feature film. It's one of these weird industries where you have to be incredibly confident, and you've never done, you don't know you can make a feature film until you've made a feature film. I realized, I guess that comes back to the confidence thing. I'm sort of underconfident. Like now I feel like I could work with a producer. I really know myself so much better, and I understand how I work with people and what I need. It's a very confidence boosting exercise, what I've been through in the last few years. And that's great, because now I found a kind of my voice. I found myself as a director, and so I'm ready now. So I think other directors who right away they just work with a producer and they know they can defend their own vision. I guess I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to do that, to defend myself, because I wasn't sure, I didn't know myself well enough. That was one of probably my biggest motivator for saying, fuck it, I'm going to just do it on my own.
There can be nothing worse that you spend all this time doing a script and then somebody comes in and they're like, no, trying to sort of like change your vision, maybe purely for like commercial reasons.
Exactly. And especially if you're in a position where it's like, I'm so grateful to have this big producer. I'm out in the woods and you're coming and saving me and letting me make my film. That maybe once again comes back to a confidence thing. That then you do it without money, suddenly you realize you're making compromises anyway because you don't have money.
So what's your next project? Do you see yourself maybe moving into sort of like television if you haven't already?
It's interesting because this script wanted to be a television script. So many tangents, and I've still got, amazing scenes between Alice and Francois's mother. And there's something about television that it would just be amazing to write for television, just because you can really get into all the nitty gritty. Yeah, but then also I really love cinema. So, and I do have another feature project. So that's sort of something that I've worked on for a few years as well. And
is the next script going to be something completely different?
Well, it's still a lot about kind of identity, self-identity, and how we our identification of the world versus how people see us and what we're supposed to be. Sort of the theme that interests me. But I'm also fascinated by heterosexuality. It's interesting because my other script is about a trans character.
Okay.
I'm all over the shop. But I guess those themes about intimate relationships and identity, self-identity versus the identity the world gives us versus who we really are has always fascinated me.
My final question, a fun question. Say they're going to give you like $200 million. What would be your dream project?
When I think about big budget and dream project, think about certain actors I'd love to work with. I mean, I really write for actors.
Okay.
I really do. Coming from the theatre, and also, I'm very interested in intimate character studies. That's what turns me on. That's what I love the most, is really great, interesting character studies. And God, if you have the lead with this actress who has such an incredible presence and brings so much to the screen, and imagine working with this actor or this cinematographer. No matter how big the budget, I still think there needs to be some intimate, personal, interesting story. Otherwise, who cares?
So there you have it. I had a great time chatting with Josephine. Please do like and subscribe to the show on SoundCloud and YouTube, and drop a comment or two. And you can get in touch with me at the Salmoning01 on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. I've been Tom, and I'll catch up with you next episode.